this computer? Great. I will send you the WeTransfer. Cool. Let's just check the recording in progress. Good. Okay, good to go. Right. It looks like the two of you have spaghetti between yourselves. That's so sweet. That's so sweet. Let's see who bunches it up quicker. So
otherwise, it's going to be a mess when we listen with two laptops and two speakers here.
yeah. So I think to jump straight in and go to our rentals process, which is really, the fundamental part, the ABCs of getting involved in a deal, from application all the way through to sending the documents, sending the invoice, and between the agent and Denny, getting the deal over the line as quickly as possible. So hands up if you have received and read through the page that is the rentals process, please. Okay, so you're all familiar with it, but so on that note, are you happy that we go through it, or are you familiar with it? Do you have any queries? And with that in mind, what would you like the agenda to be in this meeting? And having said that, I can ask Denny as well what her, let's say, obstacles or frustrations have been, if any, to date with the Four Ways branch.
I think it would be nice if you maybe run through the whole rentals flow process from start to finish with us. Then we know, like from your perspective and on the receiving end, what might be things we need to look out for, and also how you guys process it. Then we know we're doing it correctly from the start.
Terrific, thank you. So, look, I think I'm like the next guy in terms of theory versus practical. Very difficult to read through theory and then implement it once for the first time and actually do it properly. So we certainly do appreciate that mistakes will be made as for the first or second deal, hopefully not more than that in regards to going through the process. But if you just take accountability, print out the process, put it on every file for every deal that you're busy with, and that way it's just it's like a standard grade. You follow step one, you put something in your file. Step two, what must I do? Send the invoice, go through the lease, whatever it is. I've really made it very simple. But if you try and memorize the process or forget about it, you're going to run into let's say you're going to clash with us, because we're going to say, hold on, you've missed 4 steps, and now things are going to be delayed. Or we might run into trouble with an application that was processed too quickly, or an application that took too long. You lose the deal, the landlord is upset, the tenant is upset. You can, God forbid, well, with Midrand, to be honest, because they used to conclude their own deals without us at all when they were a franchise, we used to, so to speak, just trust, and it worked perfectly. I don't think I received one angry tenant or landlord or deal that shouldn't have gone through in like 15 years. But now that they're going through us, we have sort of implemented, they've joined our process, which is still a bit of an ongoing thing to make both parties happy and work together. But in regards to going through the application, they do that on their side. They even process the TPN. So we trusting them to actually approve, which makes me nervous and I don't sleep at night. I'm allowing them to vet every application and basically decide whether the tenant is good or not. But it puts first under a lot of risk, because but that won't happen with you guys. I'll just go back to us. Well, it won't happen with you folks, so there's not that much risk, because you're going to follow our process to the T, and we'll get to the vetting and how that works in a moment. So basically, as long as you follow our process, there won't be there won't be upset tenants or landlords, because we've got things down. We've got things down in terms of speed, in terms of professionalism, and all these good things. So I am sharing my screen. Note. Oh, wait, that's not it. Rental process flow. Rentals procedure. Sorry, it's always here. Where is it? Okay, I've got it. Right, minimize that. All right, so try not to read ahead. And yeah, try read with me. Please stop me, maybe at the end of every block, to ask any question. Now is your time, but of course I'm always available, and I'm quickest on WhatsApp or Denny, but preferably me. Denny's a really hectic person. She walks in here about 4:45 in the morning or 5:15, and she leaves at 4:45. I'm available after 4:45. Even if you've got an application to send in, say at 4:30, I can get the ball rolling. But she's otherwise available throughout the day. Look on the phone as well, but I think best on email with her. Anyway, let's get going. So before the listing, the landlord, lessor, is ideally, now you don't have to do this, but it's ideal to sign the authorization to lease. If you don't have any of these documents, please ask me afterwards, otherwise known as the mandate, as for the main reason that this will avoid a commission dispute at the time of signing the lease, because we've got the commission mentioned in the mandate, and the landlord will sign that off, so the landlord won't have a leg to stand on if they try and negotiate the rental, negotiate the commission at the time of signing the lease agreement. Good. Ensure the listing is absolutely correct. Parking bays also keeps me sweating at night. You know, we don't know how many parking bays a two-bedroom apartment has. So if you put 2 parking bays and the landlord overlooks it, even though they've signed the lease, and this has all happened before, and we don't know how many parking bays there are. We trust you. The marketing department trusts you. The tenant is trusting you. The landlord is trusting you. And that lease agreement is signed. The tenant moves in and there's only 1 parking bay. And they told you that they needed 2 parking bays. Okay? I don't need to say any more. It becomes hectic. Right, next. Know the maximum number. Sorry, and I mean, look, on that, we would ultimately defend ourselves by saying, Mr. Landlord, you should have read, it was clear in the lease. It wasn't in the small T's and C's. It was clear in the lease on page 1 that we noted that there were 2 parking bays. You should have brought it to our attention, but we apologize that we messed up. But the landlord could come back, and the tenant could come back and really have a good fight with us and say that we were negligible and hold us to finding a new apartment, giving back our commission. It gets unpleasant, unnecessarily unpleasant. You've got to know every element of what you are leasing and put that down to the finest detail in the lease agreement. Moving on. Know the maximum number of people permitted to occupy the premises amongst other critical items. In sectional title units, that would be a maximum of 2 people per bedroom, and usually it's fine if a baby is placed into a main bedroom, by the way. Next, you must get the landlord to complete, similar to sales, to complete our rentals.
Sorry, may I interrupt? Stefan? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. You just mentioned now, when we spoke about maximum number of people in a unit, and if there's a baby. So are we saying, let's say it's a 2-bedroom, the maximum is 4 people, but you can have +1 if it's a baby?
Sorry, can't hear you. Were you asking that you can have 4 people, but you can, in addition to that, have a baby? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Am I understanding you correctly?
We've done that a few times in the past, and it wasn't an issue that we heard of after the lease began. So it seems to be okay. But once that kid is like 9 years old, and the neighbors, if the neighbors find out that's when it could become a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, Tracy, just also for an example, the body corporate rules will also state, some of the body corporates put in their rules, if it's a 2-bedroom, it's allowed for, 4 grown-ups and a baby, or 3 grown-ups and a baby, or 2 children and 2 grown-ups if it's a 1-bedroom. So sometimes just check the body corporate rules. They actually stated there if you guys are unsure of if it's a complex or something.
And thank you, Zanmia. And please ensure that you are reading the latest version of the body corporate rules. If the landlord says, have the body corporate rules, you need to say, are you sure this is the latest version?
Hi, Ephraim.
Dave, yeah, please, you raise your hand.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Let's go back one step. You were talking about authority to lease, that you said your opening statement was ideally to be wise to get authority to lease. Otherwise, we might get into a dispute when it comes to commission. I've got a client that has actually given me a go ahead to list their property, but they haven't signed the authority to lease. Can I list it and we can sign the authority
100%.
to lease later?
100%. 100%. We
Okay,
must never,
wonderful.
we must never be held back. Please never hold back
Okay.
if the client refuses to sign the authority to lease. Some of them don't. I've heard from not even often, but once in a blue moon, I hear that a landlord is scared to sign it because they think that in some way it's a sole mandate and they're limited to using us as agents. So if they don't sign it, I think according to law, we are not allowed to proceed without them. But it's fine. We live in South Africa and not to worry about that. Any other questions on that, folks? On that block? Okay, let's move on. Right. Now, Denny has the most fabulous email templates for sending to new applicants, which details what documents to request. So that email template, that's wording in the body of the email, you don't need to come up with it or write it up every time you send an applicant the application form. Hi, thanks for viewing the property and all that. We have a lekker template. If you haven't received it, please ask Denny to send you the latest one. Okay, and then save it on your computer. You just read through it. Maybe there's a few things you want to change based on your interaction with the applicant and that. But ultimately, what is it? It's the application form as an attachment. And then in the body of the email, it says, kindly send through the bank statements and the salary slips and all these things. So that's all there. Next, application forms must be sent to your applicants, 1 per lessee. A lessee is 1 name on the lease agreement. There might be 5 tenants. That's 5 people living in the property, but 1 lessee. That lessee will be the person who is financially responsible to pay the rental. And that must be filled in fully, please. Make sure it's filled in fully. Please don't send that to us if for example, if the the work-related information, employment information is not filled in. This stuff only delays the application, okay? Because it goes back to you. You have to go back to the landlord, to the tenant, right? We're not allowed to process a TPN application unless that form is signed. The applicant, right, Dave, go ahead. Dave, go ahead.
So I'm muted. Sorry about that. I'm saying I have an issue with the TPN process because in most cases you find client coming through wanting a property and the owner would say, you know what, let's do TPN first because you are wasting my time. Is it possible for us to start with the TPN before filling in anything so that I don't waste my time, I don't waste the owner's time as well? Because sometimes you do all the work, you go and take people to view the property, and then when you come to the TPN side, the potential tenant is fraud and you've wasted all the time. Is it possible for us to do TPN? Because the last time I spoke to Danny, when I wanted to do TPN before I do the paperwork, she said to me, no, I have to do TPN and attach it to a particular property. I said, the property will come after I have done TPN because that's what the landlord wanted. Is it possible for us to do TPN before we do the paperwork?
No, that's fine. But please get the 195 Rand that we charge tenants for the TPN. Please get that from them. Yeah, before we do the TPN, then it's fine. That's fine.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Right.
Can we put that in writing? Can we put that in writing, Ephraim, please?
Yeah, okay. I will actually edit. I'll edit that here. I'll edit that here. Nice one. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Pleasure, pleasure. And we understand that there's exceptions to virtually every rule, and that sometimes people put us under pressure. So we have to work within reason to close deals, but we don't enjoy pressure. Let me rather rephrase that. We are you should be, and we should be very cautious when people tell us, oh, I need this in 10 minutes. Oh, I need this back whenever, or I need occupation within 24 hours. This is a red flag. Okay. Applicant also supplies, they must reply with their FICA and relevant documents to prove affordability, such as bank statements, etc. And this is all outlined in my manager's form, which we must also go through today. And the manager's form is like a checklist, so it really makes things easier for you to know whether you've received everything. Here we go. Also, employment agreement where necessary, company financial statements when a lessee is signing in the name of the company, and the company will be responsible for payment. And then we also need the company registration documents, and sometimes even more than that. Right. See attached manager's form and fill. So this is like the next step, right? Once you've got that and you're happy with all the you know that you've received all the information, all the documents, you don't need to ask the tenant anything more. Then look at the manager's form and fill it out in full. So here it is. It's basically a checklist to check that you've vetted the applicant and his or her documents thoroughly. Every relevant item is critical. Things that you don't need to fill out, like if it's a private individual, you don't need to do certain things like get the company bank statements, like I mentioned. Those you can leave blank. If you miss an item or you don't answer the section adequately, it will only delay the application. What actually it amazes me every time. Sometimes, too often, we get an application in, the tenant is renting, but there's no information about the landlords, about the agent calling the current landlord to ask whether the tenant has been a good tenant or not. We send it back and we say, you got to do this, make the call, send it back. Really, it's a waste of time. Okay. Next, if applicant passes your personal vetting, then you email the manager's form and everything else received from the applicant to Denny. And please, the subject line of that email must state the property address. Then, at that stage, unless it's in regards to, unless we follow David's situation there, at that stage, only then Denny will run the TPN. If every necessary detail is filled in and every required document is received. But there's a caveat here. If we look at the manager's form, because this is what we do, we vet here at HQ, we vet the tenant just as you have. And if we feel, hold on, we're not so sure about this tenant, we're not so confident with him, we're going to come back to you and say, we don't think it's worthwhile doing the TPN because we believe that this is not going to be a lekker tenant. Or please get some more information because we're not confident that this tenant should be the one that takes the property. And before we go through the exercise, which takes about 5 minutes to do the TPN, and it costs money, and we do TPNs even when, at this stage, even when tenants have not paid the 195, because they don't always pay, and we don't want to delay it. Okay, so all right, with that in mind, I think if I made that clear, right. Then, after Denny does the vetting, Denny shall return your email with either approved or rejected in the manager's form, or with follow-up items to be investigated. If that's the case, please do your follow-ups and add your further comments back in the manager's form. So please don't add it to an email. Look back in the manager's form where Denny would have written certain things that need to be reinvestigated or added, and reply back in the manager's form when you send it back to Denny, please. Note, Denny's approval does not mean that the applicant has been accepted or approved by the landlord. That's really important. And I've made that clear in my latest manager's form at the top there, I've said that this must all be sent to the landlord for their ultimate approval. Good. There we go. Any questions so far, people?
Tulani has a question.
Tulani, you saying something?
Boketov. I just want to ask you a question based on the experience that I do have. In a case where a prospect tenant comes through who was rejected, not rejected, was no longer interested in another apartment with another agent, then approaches me with their own TPN report. In that case, do we consider their TPN report, or do we have to conduct our very own? Because he has already, or he has paid for the TPN already.
Yeah, if that TPN was done, say, within the last week, and it was a TPN, in other words, it was a credit check done via TPN and not through another credit bureau, we're happy to accept it. You know, it's a document that's got lots of colors and fixed text.
Yeah.
Well, obviously fixed text, but like one font. And I think it's very, very difficult to forge the document. So we're pretty happy not having to reprocess the TPN. If the landlord specs it or requires it, not a problem. We're only too happy to reprocess, but the applicant has to re-sign the application form.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Good. I don't think I read this. If and when approved by Denny, email absolutely all documents, including the manager's form, to your landlord for their ultimate approval, which is always needed. Good. Then, provide the feedback from your landlord to your applicant. If the applicant is approved by your landlord, again, if the applicant is approved by the landlord, then you guys draft the lease agreement thoroughly, and maybe I guess we also should go through the lease agreement, okay? Next week, let's do it. Draft the lease agreement thoroughly, remembering to include any and all further conditions or subject tos that may have been discussed between the parties. Then send the lease back to Denny to check. We do it quickly, I promise you, just to check that everything's there, everything's in the right place, plus the disclosure form and the body corporate rules and the move-in form. We don't often see that. And please do not send any of the above direct to your landlord just yet. Denny shall then return the lease plus an invoice stating the deposit, the rental, and the admin fee. Then send, so this is actually 1, 2, 3, 4. Then send all the above documents, the lease, the disclosure form, the invoice, the body corporate rules, the moving form, to your applicant for initial and signing. Straightforward. Do not simply forward the signed lease received back from the applicant to your landlord. You need to inspect it first, noting missing initials and any additional or deleted words or clauses that the applicant has edited in the lease. And that applicant is soon to become the tenant. Okay? In other words, don't be a robot and just forward it on. Be a professional agent, look through the lease. Is every page initialed? Has the tenant edited the lease in any way? Right? Dave, please go ahead.
If I'm regarding the lease and the deposit that needs to be banked by the landlord, when the time of exiting the property comes, it has to be sent back to the tenant with the interest. This is regarding the Muslim community. They do not believe in interest payment. Yeah. Can we include a clause in the lease that protects that if the deposit is kept, it's not going to incur any interest? It will be given back to the potential or to the tenant as it is, because remember I had a situation like that where I had a landlord that was a Muslim who didn't believe in interest paying or interest bearing monies. So how are we going to do that with regards to that?
Simple. The landlord must tell you ahead of time that they will not add interest to the deposit. You have to scratch that out in the lease agreement, and the tenant can either accept or what's the other word, or reject that.
Or reject. Okay.
Up to them. Up to them. Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
Sure. It really is as straightforward as that. If all above, right, so when all the above is in order, send the lease to your landlord to sign. Okay, again, so this is a bit of a repeat, but now you've received the lease back from the landlord. When the landlord signs and returns the lease, again, do not simply forward it on to Denny, please. Inspect it, again, noting missing initials or signatures. Sometimes the landlord has added or deleted words to the clauses. On the clauses, the lease will, and then, if he has done that, then the lease will need to be resent to the tenant for their approval by way of initialing change clauses. If changes are made by the landlord at this stage, the tenant does not have a what's the word, like a viable lease, a valid lease, until they've initialed the changes made by the landlord. So Dave, in your case, if the landlord only makes the change at that stage, either say you forgot to edit it in the lease, or the landlord remembered or has now decided to not add interest, landlord can change it at that stage. But if the tenant doesn't agree, then he does not have to be held to that clause in the lease until he initials next to it. And when if that's the case, then the landlord, if they still want the lease agreement to continue, they could then basically undo that clause that they've changed, and revert back to the original lease that the tenant signed. Once the lease, the last line in this block here, once the lease is fully initialed and signed, send it please immediately to Denny and inform her whether a referral fee is due. Sometimes we get the fully signed lease back from the agent a week later, and on the day that we now need to make payments to the landlords. So it really puts everybody under pressure. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Denny sit back and say, I don't even have the lease agreement. Next, once the tenant has paid the invoice in full, and please check emails from Brenda or Denny, it's usually Brenda, advising that the monies are in, the rental has been concluded, and you can then arrange a date and time for the key handover. Please be present at the key handover. It's professional and courteous to do so. Folks, when you receive the email from Brenda, which is a kind of summary of rental payments that she has in her account, note please that sometimes the tenants do not put the necessary the necessary reference in the reference block. So you need to be aware every day that your money should be coming in and what amount it is. Okay. At that stage, if you see that amount, and it's usually a specific amount, it could be 14,989 or 21,989. Look out for that. And when you're sure it comes in on the day that you're expecting, and it's the amount that you're expecting, 99% of the time, it's correct. You know, you wouldn't have incorrectly stated that it's yours, and then you can say it's my money. If you're 1% unsure that it is money from your specific tenant, please ask them for a proof of payment. Right? Why have I put this in caps? Because it's really important. Tenants must never ever get access to the property until all funds have been cleared. So we don't like proof of payments, okay? Never show us a proof of payment, for example. It means nothing to us, okay? And they can be JIPO'd as well. Until all funds have cleared in the first trust account and the lease is fully signed. It is your duty to ensure this. Monies take up to 2 days to clear in our bank account, if the tenant does not bank with Standard Bank, all right, failure to abide by the above may result in your dismissal from the department, as well as your taking full accountability for any negative consequences that may arise. For example, you've put a tenant in a property. I did this once, probably in the first 6 months when I opened the department. I put a tenant into a property after having received a check for about 24,000 plus admin fee. That check bounced and the guy stayed on for a couple of months until I sent John, our driver, to change the locks, which was a hair-raising thing to do, I promise you. It was hair-raising. Because, for example, that property was fully furnished and the landlord was in Australia. And I was very nervous that this guy overnight on any particular day would put all the fancy paintings and everything else into a bakkie and disappear. I promise you the landlord would have held us responsible. And he probably lost out on about 4 months of rental. Perhaps we paid it, I don't recall if we paid him for that time. Could have been only 2 months or even 1 month. Because within a week, we came down hard on that tenant. I was taking no nonsense from him. Right. So as soon as we realized that initial payment bounced, we realized this guy's going to be trouble. But he could have stayed and he could have used all kinds of legal actions to say, no, man, there's still a lease in place. Give me the keys for the new locks and send the sheriff, or I'm waiting for a court order to leave the property. That could take at least 3 months and a minimum of 30,000 Rand of spending to attorneys. Debbie handles all the admin from this point, including the payment of the deposit to the landlord on occupation date only, processing your commission only if FICA was received, and sending out the final thank you letters to your clients. She also sends out a courtesy email to the landlord halfway through the lease. That makes it a lot easier to receive renewal commission at the end of the lease. Otherwise, so please be involved in also calling the landlord once or twice during the lease agreement. Could be on their birthday, could be just a hello, trust everything is going well, have a good day. We don't want to get involved in stories. And this makes it much easier to receive the renewal commission from the landlord at the end of the lease, because they don't say, oh, hello, First Realty, or hello, agent, hello, Denny. Haven't heard from you in 10 months, because which would be 12 months, but we do the renewal contract before the last 2 months of the lease agreement. So we don't like them saying, oh, you're just calling me for money, are you? Well, that's typical of agents, whatever it may be. Let's not be one of those agencies. And then,
we say here that payment of the deposit is made to the landlord on the occupation date.
Yeah, we prefer doing that because 1 out of 1,000 leases. Sorry, go ahead.
Does that include the rental to him, less our commission? Most landlords insert the keys to a potential tenant if I haven't received my money. So how do we work around this one?
Yeah.
Landlord won't let you in if he doesn't have his money, and we're talking about the same day. So how do we manage that?
Yeah, the way you have to manage that is to tell the landlord that our typical process is to only pay the landlord once the tenant is in. It's few and far between that we have found that the landlord expects payment in their account before they give the keys. That's fine, but just know it up front, and we want to, and we will then accordingly pay the landlord immediately at the time of the key handover. So just manage it together with us. Look, the only reason this is done is because really 1 out of 1,000 leases, in one of 1,000 leases, I believe, and I don't think it's ever happened, that the landlord will take the money and refuse to give access, basically disappear, right? And refuse to give access. Then the tenant will come back to us and say, well, you shouldn't have paid over the money without me getting access. So that's the picture. So it's just about managing that, okay? Taking into account that if we pay the land, if you're standing with the landlord and landlord says, okay, here are the keys, but where's my money? If we then make the payment, even if it's an immediate transfer, which we prefer to not do, it could take an hour or two perhaps. So it can also lead to delays and upset clients. So just manage that with us. Give us the assurance, basically, that your landlord is an investor. He's not running away with the money, and that kind of story. If that's the story, we'll pay the landlord a week before occupation date. Okay. Please go the extra mile. Be in contact with both parties at least once during the lease. This also makes it far easier to recover renewal commission, all right? So I've explained that. Folks, can we jump, it's only 10:46, can we jump into and ask me afterwards, pop me an email and ask me if you want to receive this. I'll send this again to 4ways_branch afterwards, and you will receive it again. Right, let's go through the manager's form. Okay. This has been a game changer since I put it together, because it just allows you to not miss a beat in respect of what you received, what you followed up on, and where we might run into issues at a later date. Okay, so please look it over thoroughly. First thing, agent to submit this form to the landlord, like we said, for their written approval. Please put the address in, please put the rental amount in, and then the third column is for us, obviously, to fill out. Now, listing related, authority to lease, and yes or no over here. Is it signed and attached together with the manager's form, the disclosure form? Have you done that? The body corporate rules received. You don't need to send it to us at this stage, or do you? According to the process flow, we do want it at this stage, right? And then we insisted at this stage, rather. First managed lease, yes, no, or maybe. Yeah, let us know about that at this stage, please, so we can start getting our ducks in a row if it is going to be a managed lease. And then if it's referred by anybody, please state their details. Right, applicant, if there is more than 2 lessees, let us know, or you can even fill that out on a separate manager's form, but it's true. I don't think I've seen more than 2 lessees in a couple of years. You would get that when you have, say, 5 professionals or 5 friends living in a property. Then they each usually take accountability. Because if one takes accountability and has their name on the lease, then they know, well, if 2 of my friends duck and they stop paying, then I'm responsible. So in those cases, you'll get more than 1 lessee. But those are not lekker leases, because you have people coming and going, and it leads to issues. Also, boyfriends and girlfriends. I'm not a big fan of those leases as well. We always insist on both parties, even if the one party can afford to have their name, or can afford the amount of the lease. We prefer having both parties on the name, because for the simple reason that, let's say it's the wife, the girlfriend who's earning more, she then ducks, but we've only got the boyfriend's name on the lease agreement. Do you know how difficult it's going to be to get the money from the girlfriend who the landlord and us can't reach? As look, it would be the landlord's problem if we are not doing management, but I promise you the landlord would come back to us if they are astute, and they would say, you should have advised me that this situation could come about, and you should have advised or insisted that both parties' names should be on the lease agreement in order to mitigate that risk. Okay, so the names on the lease, bada bing, bada boom. Individuals or directors, have you received 3 salary slips? Yes or no? All right. Affordability. Is the person's, let's say just one lessee, Joe Sophia, right? So has Joe, does Joe's net income equal 3 times the rental? So let's say the rental is 21,000 Rand a month. 21,000. 612, what's it? 714.21. So if his salary is 7K per month, and you can write, yes, I have received the salary slips. Okay, you know, the more you write, the better. Then this would be yes. Okay. By the way, we do not vet tenants as thoroughly as the banks do. Okay? We're not expected to. And so we more use our opinion and our history of knowing, not so much a gut feel, but knowing what sort of is acceptable, for lack of the right word, and what is not in regards to whether we believe a tenant will pay or not. So for example, if the tenant only earns 5,900 Rand a month, we would say, you could say a no, but close, you know what I mean? And then the landlord ultimately looks at this, and it's the landlord's choice. And we could say, we'd probably say here, approved, but note that Joe's affordability is a little lacking. Okay. Employment, have you confirmed it via landline only? No serious company only has a cell phone. Okay, we like landlines, and preferably you speak to a secretary. There's a secretary, and there is a HR department that you get put through to. Okay, yes or no? Company website and Google Street View verified. I put this in quite recently because I promise you, dodgy tenants are becoming smarter and smarter. So please look for a company website and do a Google Street View. Sometimes we do a Google Street View based on the address, and we just see it's a little house in a regular neighborhood. And then we know it's a red flag. You've got to go back to your tenant and say, well, we found this. What's the story? Okay. You're allowed to, and you should not be scared at all. Do not be scared to go back to a tenant and query anything at all. If they start getting jittery, then you know. Then you know what the story is, okay? Bank statements, right. A to E. So, have you received the last 3 months net income? Sorry, have you looked through the last 3 months net income in the statements? And these must match the amount on the bottom right of the salary slip. And here, please state the amounts as I put there. And then if not salaried, please add up the income per month. You don't need to sit with your calculator, but you can basically just take the 1,000 Rand column, just add it up and put in, so it could be 20,000, 28,000, 35,000. Just state that there, okay? Right, then have you checked for the last 3 months of rental payments? And then state those amounts as well. If the rental payment from 3 months ago is missing, right here, missing, right? But then what we're going to say here is, if you haven't done it, is follow up. Why is it missing? So what you should do here is actually write, the tenant says whatever, you know, my mom paid for it, I gave the guy cash, whatever it is. Let's get those answers, even if those answers are not true, okay? Let's just get what the tenant says. We'll take a look at it and judge his truth, judge, you know, how we think, you know what I'm trying to say. And the landlord will do the same thing. Right, are there bad debts or bounce payments? Loans received, has the tenant applied for any loans? And do all columns add up correctly? We often find that dodgy tenants are really, really smart and they forge documents really well. But what they sometimes forget to do, or they just never passed grade 2 maths, is they don't work out, or they forget to add up the columns correctly. So, for example, if the guy's on a balance of say 20,000, now he's received a salary of 18,000. The 20,000 goes down by 18,000 instead of up by 18,000. Okay, so that balance column is quite a giveaway sometimes. Right. If your tenant is a legal entity, if your lessee is rather, remember that we might need a resolution that's down here. Resolution, and that the director or a representative of the company needs to physically sign the lease. Okay, there needs to be a human to sign the lease. Obviously, right. The website and Google Street verified. Last 3 months bank statements. Have you received them? Company financials. So you see here. So I'm a bit less thorough here, because when you send them through, typically with companies, at a glance, you can see whether. In fact, I should actually add up here. I should state whether there's affordability, right? But we look over those bank statements, as you should, and they typically, almost always, easily have affordability when it comes to a legal entity. So, we're not trying to baby anybody here. You guys need to be, professionals and understand that, and we trust you that you've looked through the bank statements, and even though you've received them, if there's any issue with them, you might pass here, have received, but actually not much money to be found, or rather, okay, it could be, as would rather be have received, but doesn't seem that the company can afford this rental. Okay. Then what we'd say here is, please follow up with the tenant and ask and bring this to their attention, which you really should have done prior to sending us this manager's form, and bring this to their attention and ask them how exactly they see the company see the company handling the payments, of the lease agreement. Okay, right. Have you received? Now, you don't need to receive the company financial statements, but ideally, ask for them, and if you are sent it, it's a bonus. Okay. Letter from accountant. Have you received a letter from the accountant? Which would verify both the company's financial statements, as well as whether the company can afford the lease agreement. Good. And please call the accountant, please call their offices to check that that accountant does exist on planet Earth, and that they did receive, and that they did send out that letter. And then a resolution from the directors is really important. Right, credit checks. So we do the credit check, so we will do this for you, okay? We will send it back to you. So we might find here that, yes, there is a judgment, right? So we could say a one judgment, and we'd say maybe 50,000 Rand with Edgar's, and we say a follow-up. Then you need to go back to the tenant and say, you didn't tell us it, or you're not sure. No, if it's a judgment, they would certainly be sure of it. Maybe if it's a default, they might miss the email to say that they now have a default. Judgment, they know all about, because they've essentially been called to court. So follow up and basically ask what the tenant's excuse is or reason for this. A lot of times with women, when they are divorced, the husband has put things in their name, and they then land up in what we call, I think it's more Yiddish, but Stoch Street. And they get all terrible defaults and judgments in their name that they have a lot of difficulty removing. So this can surely affect their affordability, but maybe they have some payment plan to sort out the matter, to pay up the bill. But at the very least, we need to bring it to their attention and get their feedback. Okay. Rental payment data. So this is uploaded by a rental managing agency or a private landlord, should they wish to upload the data. Typically, when a managing agent or a landlord is using it will always be a landlord who has used a managing agency. Typically, managing agents always upload the data. So you'll see in an example, we can also try and go through that if you guys have another 5 minutes after this, which would be awesome. It doesn't take long. You can go through a TPN document, and I'll show you what rental payment data looks like. And we might say here, rate for the last year, 1 year, but missed a few payments in his previous the rental apartment in the previous year. Have they applied for loan applications? Maybe that's a no. Is the bank verified in the TPN? That's almost always yes. And the SACRA, I'll show you an example of that in the TPN, what that's about. Right. Is the property owned by the current tenant's property? Does the landlord own it? Or does the applicant own it? Typically, tenants are renting, they have been renting before. Please verify the property to see who actually owns the property, and then what's the landlord's feedback. It could be a great tenant, sad to lose them, but please note that we never truly know who we're calling and what their motive is. Okay, it could be a brother-in-law who, you can see where I'm going with this, who is falsifying the report, and we then might end up, just based on this alone, we might then end up putting a dodgy tenant into an apartment. So this I always take with a pinch of salt. Sometimes you can get the gist, very often you can get a gist when you're speaking to the landlord, whether it's a legit landlord or not. But unless you at the tenant's current property and you're speaking to somebody who you just know is the landlord based on their being in the property, welcome to my house, whatever. If you know, however you might know, that you're at the property, which wouldn't really happen, and you know for sure that the landlord is the landlord, then you can go on this, and you can write here, absolutely 100% verified landlord, and that the above is true. I promise you, and if this is positive, and we see here that the rental payment is positive, I promise you, we have never not approved a landlord based on that. Even if they have a judgment or a default, we would still approve, but we would still note it that the person has a judgment or a default, but they are clearly managing their finances so that and in that respect, they have paid their rental on time, first thing in the month. It's what they've done, and they respect that. Happy days. Can we move on to a TPN? Everybody good for that? I'll take that as a yes. Any questions with the manager's form? Margaret Naidu, sorry to be showing your details to a gallery of people that shouldn't be looking at your details. So excuse me for that. Right. Mrs. Margaret Naidu. Okay, executive summary, consumer information. So there's all these different blocks. Also known as Margaret. So this would just be different spelling, right? And here it might be a maiden name. Good. Identity, there's not always a photo. Married female, don't know what harness is. And don't worry too much about this. But look, this does show you whether the person has been verified with a population registration database. We don't worry about that, to be honest. And again, we actually look through the TPN. So if we find anything that we are not sure about or unfamiliar or we find something that we're not happy about, we bring it to your attention. Okay. So, you can trust us with that. And we take accountability with that. Good. So basic credit score, please ignore this. I'll tell you why when we say, or at least we ignore it. And I'll tell you why. If they haven't been renting and there's no rental history for them, but everything else is fine, they're only marked as average, but they might be the most incredible payer, but there's no rental data that was uploaded onto their detail. They might be the superest, to invent a new English word, tenant that there ever was, but this will only be average. Okay, so take it with a pinch of salt. Now, credit report summary. This is just a summary here, so you can see judgments via TPN listed on TPN, which is one credit bureau, 0, basically not applicable, and defaults 0. On TransUnion, the other credit bureau, we again have 0 and 0. All right, different contact addresses, different addresses that they have uploaded, specifically that they've supplied to what would you call it? To suppliers over the years. These would be the addresses. And what we look at here is when we see that there are just a whole lot of different addresses in a short space of time, we then think, well, why are they moving so much? Okay. Any comment there?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing.
Yeah. Okay, good. Right. And then see, there's a lot of repeats here because we're looking at the reports from two, and sometimes it's 3 credit bureaus, or at least it used to. It looks like we've dropped Experian. Can't remember why. I think Experian stopped their sort of contract with TPN, so we'd have to do credit checks directly on the Experian platform, which we don't do, and so far so good. Okay, because there's a lot of repeats between, as we can see here, between the platforms. So if the person has a default, it would show up in TransUnion. Okay. Right, inquiry information. This shows here that on the 30th of April, we did a TPN on this person. And if we see here that, on the 29th, Chas Everett did it, also did an application, we have to ask, well, why did the tenant either get rejected?
Why they find 2 places at the same time?
Well, yeah, or over the last week. Why have they been potentially rejected from these other properties? But again, you need to take this with a pinch of salt, because maybe they were approved, but another tenant was accepted by a landlord. So it's not a red flag. We'd call this an orange flag if there were 3 or 4 other agencies that had run TPN checks on this tenant, say in the last 2 weeks. We'd take that as an orange flag and note it in the manager's report. Right, TransUnion, again, it just gives a summary of the persons that looks wrong. Margaret N. Okay, maybe looks like it's missing a digit there. It's got a letter mixed around. A summary of the person's information. Good. AKA, again, consumer addresses, telephone numbers. We have a look, and if we see in the last month or 2 or 3, the person has like 3 or 4 cell numbers, it's a bit of a red flag for obvious reasons. Again, here we have a summary of notices, judgments, and defaults. Now, the SACRA is quite interesting. We've only been looking at this recently. So here it shows that this is their accounts with 5 different suppliers, right? Their current balance owing to these suppliers is 220, but their monthly installments, that's nice and affordable. Only 6,000 Rand payable to Edgar's, Woolworths, whoever it is. So that's pretty affordable, all right? I see tremendously high amounts, sometimes in monthly installments. Okay. And then there's often another line there that says outstanding or owing, which means that they are now in debt. They haven't paid their monthly installment for however long. And that's a red flag, right? Because they're probably going to do the same with their rental property. And here we can see which other, I think the word is suppliers, have done TPNs on them. So here they applied about a month previous to SA Home Loans for a property. They're probably rejected, and that's why they are now applying for a rental. Have they been identified? That's almost always a yes. ID status, that's what we look for here. Oh, input names match, they don't match. So we'd be very aware of this actually from the beginning of the processing of the TPN. And it's almost always the case of, it's almost always in respect of women that because they've changed their name or they've gone back to, well, they're now using their husband's name, or they've reverted to, or they've given us their old maiden name. That's where the input names wouldn't match. Bank account verification, we like to see a account found yes over there. We cannot do, or rather TPN is not connected to a couple of banks like Discovery and one or two other banks, Capitec. So we are not able to verify the bank there. But remember, this is it doesn't mean much to us because the person can still JIPO the bank statements. Okay. So even though it's verified, they do have an account at the bank. The bank statements that we're looking at, that we think, oh, they look terrific, they are not legitimate. Okay. Here we have, lastly, then we can all stop for bagels and lots. Here we have a lease agreement uploaded by Galen Property Group. Shows the person was renting in Northcliffe for 8,200 Rand. POT means paid on time. So unfortunately, Galen was very slack in adding up, or in uploading rather, the tenant's information per month. But maybe the tenant actually only rented for the month of June for a reason that we're not sure about. What we have to do in all cases except for where this is paid on time, paid on time, paid on time, paid on time. In every other case, please call the agency and ask for their yellow, green, or red light. Okay. What we see here is the legend over here. It's called the legend. POT is paid on time. GP, they paid, but within the grace period. PL is paid late. PP is partial payment. All right. DNP, that we don't like. We also don't like partial payment. Okay. Also, so if a tenant has paid, say, 2 or 3 months up front, that's the kind of thing that an agency might have to explain to you, because this might be July and August. Did not pay, but the reason they didn't pay is they paid upfront for a couple of months. So TPNs, one gets the hang of it. You will be looking through the TPNs when you receive them. Please do, because it helps you to be professional. And when a landlord or tenant might phone you to say, please go through the TPN with me. The agency has said this, the agency has said that. Well, I don't know anything about this TPN, but now that I've received it, because I think the tenant, does a tenant get a copy of the tenant doesn't get a copy of their TPN, but they are obliged to. They are, what's the word? They may receive it if they wish to. So they're entitled to receive this copy. And so you can send it to them. And if they ask a question, it would be best, folks, if you have the answers for them and you don't say, well, I'm not sure about this, that, or the other. So I'll get the rental manager to call you to explain. Happy to do that, but it doesn't look professional. Are there any questions whatsoever? So in that case, we wish you many signed leases. I'm always here to support in respect of giving advice regarding canvassing, regarding any questions related to a lease agreement. Let's perhaps look at going through the lease agreement next week. I don't go through, and on that note, I don't go through every word in a lease agreement because it would literally take about 10 hours to go through every word. When I train, I say to the guys and girls, I say to them, please read through the lease as thoroughly as possible, 2 or 3 times if you need to. Then what I do is I go through a summary of each paragraph, and so that gives you a full view of the entire lease agreement. When it comes to me doing that, plus you reading through thoroughly, and I request that you bring questions and queries to the training, which also tell me that you really have read through it, because you always should have a couple of questions on our lease agreement. That will also tell me whether the person has really read through the lease thoroughly. On that note, should we do some lease training next week or the week after?
Yes, please. If I'm just saying through what time will suit you and the link, and then we'll just put it into our calendar.
Okay, thank you. So I'll also send through the lease agreement. So in this time, please, it takes a long time to read through, I admit. You really need to set aside time and maybe break it up into 3 days, but just know it as thoroughly as you can, understanding that there might be 20 points that needs my attention, which is fine. But just that when we sit through it, much like I did with this training, I ask that you look through the process flow before this training, which I think I did in the past. I know I didn't do it specifically in this training, just so that it's not brand new to you at the time of going through the lease, because it really is. It's a lot to mentally handle if you're unfamiliar with a couple of the clauses and you're only hearing it for the first time and you haven't done more than 30 leases, so it's really quite new to you. I promise you it'll help a lot, both you and me, if you just at least fairly familiar with the terms and the clauses. Happy days?
Thank you.
Wonderful. I will share this with Chipo, and is that the only other person in the West Rand?
Yeah, maybe us as well. We have it just till.
Oh, sure. Yeah, right. I'll send it to everybody. Exactly right. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And shoot again if there are any other questions you come up with at any time. Shoot, and keep warm. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Ephraim.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, Omal.
Cheers.
Stay warm.